Hi, hello everyone. I hope you're all logged in and you can hear us properly. Welcome to the first session of ETUI Conversations. Today we will be focusing on next generation EU, and we will try and address if this instrument is fit for the challenges that we have ahead. As we all know, the promises that were made at the very launch of the package are unseen, because it is intended not only to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, but also to support research and innovation, and importantly also to enable fair climate and digital transitions and much more. But today we will be trying to focus on how this package is going to be implemented in EU member states. And because the investment plans are slowly materializing, if this instrument is really able to fulfill all of its promises, or if it's rather a response to the economic and political imbalances that have been left over from the previous Eurozone crisis. So together we have with us our guests in the studio in Brussels. We have Porte. She is professor at Copenhagen Business School, Natali from Italy, Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa. We have Philippe, Pochet, the General Director of the ETUI, and Liina, Carr, the ETUC Confederal Secretary. So before we actually dive in the webinar, just a few housekeeping guidelines. You can follow us on Twitter using the hashtag ETUI Conversations. In the chat, you will be able to see all the latest publications from our speakers. And if you do want to ask a few questions to our discussants, you can do so in the Q&A section, and it should be at the very bottom of your screen. So, Philippe, I would actually like to start with you, if you don't mind. My very first question for you is, do you think that Next Generation EU really exemplifies a new phase in the European integration process?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a difficult question, but to try to answer that, I would like to put some context, and not to analyze what is happening, but to return 20 years ago. And my main argument is politics matter, and still left and right make sense to analyze the European integration. And what we had 20 years ago, we had the momentum of Lisbon, but at that time, you had a huge majority of center-left government with Blair, Jospin, diversity, but a huge majority and a social project. We can discuss how social it is, but left and social project. And then in 2004, you had a huge change. You had the enlargement, but also a massive turn on the center-right and the right. And for the next decade, you have a huge majority of government of center-right on the right. And then you have the austerity, and that's not a surprise. If you want to explain the austerity, you look at the government, you look at the color of the government, and that's if they are on the right or center-right, why they should have a social policy. And that's the second phase. Now, how to make this phase make sense of this phase? It's not a huge change to the left. The left is losing. Most of the socialist party are done or non-existent. So it's not that the electorate has changed. I think we had two movements which are different. The first one is with the anti-austerity, anti-European populist movement, you had the center-right and the right saying, oh, we have a problem. And we have a problem, and our main problem is that could attack the internal market. And what is the project for the European level for the center and the center-right is clearly the internal market. So they say, what could we give to the left? Not that we are convinced, but just to calm the protest, and that's the pillar. And the pillar, no change in the political landscape, but some of openness. The same with the COVID. COVID is more complex because nobody understood what will happen. It's something that's new for everyone. Every day is new. So there is kind of uncertainty. And once again, the center-right and the right dominating the landscape decide to let the door open. And my point here is they are not convinced. It's not they are not convinced by your discourse. It's the center-right and the right. They didn't become leftist. They are still center-right, but they know that they have to give something in the current period. So my question is, how in the future they will react? And then there is two hypotheses, I think. Or they are convinced, could be, they were a supporter of the welfare state 50 years ago. They are convinced that they have to be more social. and then it will continue, or there will be a change in the election and the left and the green will return to the power. And I think for that, the German election are key, and we don't know what will be the result. But my main message here is we don't know, but clearly the landscape is not on the left and the green is still center-right. And then I have my doubt that it could last, unfortunately, very long.
Now moving on to Caroline. So I actually do recommend our guests to actually read this very thought-provoking paper that you are just written. So Next Generation EU, is it really a historical achievement, or is it rather an innovation to avoid future bailouts?
That's a really good question, and there's many scholars that have already written about it, and often the conclusions are that it's a historic moment. It will change everything, but I would say it's too soon to say whether it will change something that we don't know yet. We have to look at what's going to come out of the recovery and resilience plans on the ground. But the point that I make together with Elke Heinz, Stefano Sacchi, and Klaus Armenjon is that we can understand the distribution of the Next Generation EU funds, what's been earmarked in the first tranche of the fund, by looking at the past. And this is because the allocation key of the Next Generation EU is not based on criteria related to the pandemic, such as excess mortality rates or bankruptcies, but rather it's based on economic criteria related to the financial crisis. So it's looking at the level of unemployment in the 2015 to 19 period. And it's also looking at the levels of public debt. And this is where some countries had an accumulated public debt from the financial crisis. So in this sense, we argue that when we look at the funds and the allocation key, then you can see that the funds have been distributed mainly on the basis of economic criteria related to the past rather than criteria related to the present. But that's 70% of the funds, and 30% will be distributed in a second tranche. But 70% is a large chunk. And in fact, interestingly, the European Commission had proposed first distributing 60% of the funds on this basis, but in the Council, they agreed to 70%. So it also suggests that this awareness of the economic vulnerability of the countries in the periphery of Europe was a big issue in underlying the decision. So we conclude in the paper that it's an ex-ante intervention, also to avoid the future bailouts, which has economic consequences, austerity policies, and which also has consequences in terms of public opinion. So we see in countries that have experienced austerity, then after that, then the support for European integration has decreased dramatically. And what we actually see, interestingly, is if you compare right before Next Generation EU decision and right after, the support for EU integration increased right after the decision among the periphery economy. So it does have an impact, and that was also then the reading of the health package. Okay, so maybe I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. David, I will actually give the floor to you. So we're going back to Italy for a bit. So do you think that the combination of COVID and Next Generation EU does open the door for more radical reforms of EU welfare states?
Well, let's say, as already stressed by both Philippe and Caroline, to some extent it's too early to assess what does really mean both the COVID crisis on the one hand and the Next Generation EU on the other, as a practical response to the major crisis and the economic recession. I would say also from a more, let's say, scientific point of view, research analysis point of view, it is very difficult to compare the very first data and empirical evidence provided by the national recovery plans, because they are very different in terms of structure, in terms of definition of priorities, and also they lack detailed evidence and data about how the amount of money provided by the European Union will be really spent at the national level. But that said, I would say there are some indications that there has been some slight change in the priorities. First of all, those provided by the European Union. There is a lot of continuity. Philippe talked about the Lisbon strategy more than 20 years ago. Well, we can say that already at that time, there was the emphasis at the European level on both the green transition, technological innovation, and the major challenges that European political economies had to deal with. But I would say through the Next Generation EU, these priorities have been largely emphasized even more. And I would say if there is quite a change in the mission and the guidelines provided at the European Union to the member states, it's precisely what we call the twin transitions. So there is a lot of emphasis on the green transition, climate change risks on the one hand, and digitalization and technological innovation on the other. These, of course, may represent a major challenge for the welfare state as it is right now. I would say from the first reading of the different national recovery plans, and you see in the chat reference to the first paper that both me and Andrea Terlizzi, a colleague of mine at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, we delivered for the European Trade Union Confederation some months ago, comparing Spain and Italy. I would say the first evidence shows that there is to some extent a lack of ambition, and there is not a consequent activation of national policymakers in line with the more emphasis at the European level on the twin transitions. And also the revision or the reform proposed of the welfare state in these countries seems to be a little bit timid to some extent. So there is not an overall change in terms of the welfare state paradigm at the core of social policy and labor market policy. Second of all, still in terms of very preliminary findings that we have, starting from Southern European countries, but to some extent extendable to the other member states, is that also if we think about the sort of welfare recalibration, we see a sort of very simplistic kind of interpretation of this recalibration. There is a lot of emphasis of active labor market policy. There is a lot of emphasis on training. But for instance, there is not that much of emphasis on poverty alleviation. And this, by contrast, should have been a big priority in many countries, especially in Southern European countries. So I would say a little bit mixed feelings about the capacity of European and member states policymakers to really revise the welfare state, reacting to the major challenges that we have in front of us.
Brilliant, thank you, David. Now, I would actually like to ask a question to Liina. Do you think that this instrument will then contribute to the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights? And what role did the social partners have had at both the European and national level? And if you think that this has been sufficient?
Thank you very much for putting this question in the mix of from a different point of view, addressing the RRF or the Recovery and Resilience Facility as it is. Before addressing the issue with the pillar, I would, or whether it assists or promotes the implementation of the pillar, I would actually like to go back to the beginning, to the very first draft of the RRF. And there was no social. There was green, there was digital, there was the economy, there was some training, but considering that it's the instrument that is supposed to help us to kickstart our economies, to get us out from the dark place where we are at the moment in terms of hospitals, healthcare, really struggling to cope with the crisis, knowing what is happening on the labor market, what is happening in the companies, the insolvencies, the redundancies. So it was a very unpleasant surprise, let's put it this way, for a trade union movement. So what we did, of course, we mobilized our own resources, our members, working really closely with the European Parliament rapporteurs to make sure that the regulation would actually have an obligation written into it in black and white for the member states to take on board the principles that have been written down in the European Pillar of Social Rights. That it's not only about the green environment, it's not only about the digitalization. You cannot have a transition in green or in digital if you don't also take into account the social. And back to the crisis again, the purpose of the RRF. How can we deal with the pandemic crisis that has stopped the economy in Europe? It's on hold. Okay, we are opening, we are trying to come back. If we don't deal with the issues that we are seeing very clearly, like I mentioned, the insolvencies, the redundancies, the struggle in the healthcare sector, and actually a very important crucial element is the lack of people, the frontline workers who are paid pittance, who have in our sort of standard economic models or thinking, the way we conduct our economies, are the bottom of the bottom, who earn the least, but they were the ones who kept us going. So I think there are so many elements and issues that need to be addressed. But of course, as always, when we're dealing with the European level regulations, there is the question of competence. Who has the competence to insist on what? So if you look at the pillar, the latest kind of presentation from the European Commission of the pillar principles is a donut. It's a circle. And if you cut the donut exactly in half, you have either shared competencies, and then you have competencies that are predominantly in the hands of the member states, which means that the Commission actually, the European level has very little power to really insist that the member states do something. And that includes also the poverty alleviation. Okay, we can look at poverty, also try to insist that it comes into the semester, into the social, the economic governance, the recommendations that the Commission gives to the member states. But we also know that the semester processing is put on hold. We do not have country-specific recommendations. We didn't have them last year. We didn't have them definitely this year. So we are entering the new cycle. We have to see whether they will come back. But it's not just the kind of pillar. Obviously, it is supposed to be there as a strong guidance to the member states to really take into account also the social elements of the recovery and the use and planning for the national recoveries.
Brilliant, thank you. If you don't mind, I'll just go for a second round of questions from the studio, and then we can see what the public is asking. So Philippe, Next Generation EU is seen as pivotal in setting the European Green New Deal on a really strong footing, but will this transition be actually just? Do you think it has the ambition and the capacity to do so?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, because we know that we have to change the model that we consume and we produce. It's a big question. It's not just something that you can say will be solved by some document at European level. It's really a change of society. So and the first question is, what will be the Green Party, the national plan that it's not so easy because in a way there is a huge investment, but you need to have investment and you need to have something ready to be invested. It takes time. So the kind of transition will take time, and as David said, we will have to wait to see a little bit more between what is written and what will be really implemented at national level. But in the same time, I think that's kind of, it's pushing in the right direction. And let's see how much there will be a success on that. But as Liina was saying, that's okay, but where is the social dimension? And it seems to me that we have two parallel processes. We have the process when you have the investment in the green, and you have the social pillar. If you look to the social pillar in the action plan, there is very little about the green. It's kind of traditional social program that I've been for 30 years in this business. It's more or less the same keys. You look, well, what is the goal? It's the same than Lisbon. Sometimes you say, okay, is that the right document, or is the document I read 20 years ago that's poverty, unemployment, etc. So there is a difficulty to have a dialogue between social and environment. And the way to deal that so far, and I think it was a huge success of the trade union movement, because I remember 10 years ago, they were fighting to have some just transition in all the document. It was at the introduction. No, everyone agreed that just transition is needed. Even nobody knows exactly what we are meaning by that. But I think that we have to move more and more from just transition, the useful concept, to inequality, because it's about inequality that we are thinking. All people will move if we continue to be in an unequal society. And it's not just transition for the minerals and the coal. It's that if you cannot tax the richers, for example, it's easy. You can have the argument that they contribute in each country, in the European country, more to the emission of CO2 in their life. So why not to tax them 3%? 5%. It will be a good sign, and you transfer directly the tax from the rich to the other for public services that we know are emitting less CO2 emission, etc. If you propose that, it seems to be a scandal that nobody wants to increase the tax directly on the rich, but that if you want to have some direct impact, that's easy. You tax the rich because they emit more CO2, and you redistribute directly to the poorest or the middle class. And then you see something, a different discourse that we kind of fake just transition. If you go for that, I think we go to the problem that if we continue this huge level of inequality, there will be no just transition, and perhaps there will be no transition, because people will protest, don't feel that they participate, and think that this kind of taxes on the border, or tax that they don't know about what they will, on energy, they will have some money back, they will not trust that. I think that will be the problem. So more and more, I think that we have to keep just transition. We have to recognize that the Commission and the EU is pushing in the right direction, keep just transition, but go for inequality as a concept for the future society, and to mix social and environmental questions.
Now on to Caroline. Do you think that Next Generation EU can be a more long-term instrument, so that one that is strictly then embedded into future EU budgets?
I think it's unlikely. So I think it's also it's too soon to say, but also with the ruling of the German Constitutional Court, this is unlikely. And in addition to that, there will be some. It was a one-time ad hoc instrument which has been decided in the context of force majeure, corona pandemic as a force majeure. So I actually think it's quite unlikely. But what I think at the moment is relevant to analyze is whether what's happening what member states are planning in terms of the green transition in their plans. So this has been a huge help for the European Commission to actually have funding for its Green Deal, because previously there was no funding for the Green Deal, and now with Next Generation EU, all of a sudden there are funds so that there is a chance that member states also meet the EU level targets in terms of CO2 emissions, renewable energy, and efficiency. But I would also say, as reacting to something Liina was saying about the bankruptcies and the health. So the Next Generation EU is not current expenditure. So it's to kickstart the economy. So that's member states that have to deal with the bankruptcies and so on. And regarding health, there are loans provided to member states for the health area, and the only conditionality is that it has to be health related. But for political reasons, also countries like Italy have not been willing to take the health loans, although now it looks like there's some things maybe changing. But anyway, so I think it's important to look at all of the instruments in conjunction with each other. And I agree with Philippe that what's in the European Pillar of Social Rights is more or less the same that it's been there for the last 20 years. Yeah, okay, maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, so now if we can move back to David, because your specialization is pensions and pension politics, then this question is quite obligatory. So how will Next Generation EU affect the present and future well-being of the elderly?
Well, again, I would say there is a lot of uncertainty on this point. It's still unclear what could be the effect of the Next Generation EU. I would say from first point of view, as far as the content of the national recovery plans is concerned, we see in fact mixed messages and mixed priorities. I would say there is an ongoing ambiguity, both in European and national policymakers. On the one hand, they continue combining to some extent references to both financial sustainability, long-term financial sustainability of pension system, and this basically means need to take public spending under control and eventually pursuing a sort of austerity in the old age for the future. On the other hand, there is a new emphasis on the need to safeguard the social adequacy of public pensions and the pension system in general. So there is this ongoing ambiguity, and I would say that this ambiguity is even more, to some extent, destabilizing. If you think about the hidden messages from the European Union, I take the case of the Spanish government that had been put under pressure by the European Commission in the last year in order to revise the so-called Toledo Pact and to revise the old age pension system because it is assumed by the Commission to be too expensive. At the same time, there is no explicit reference in the National Recovery Plan on the need for huge cutbacks in the future. By contrast, there is reference to safeguard adequacy of public pensions. So there is this kind of ambiguity that is going on. And I would say very much will depend on the eventual revision of the Stability and Growth Pact. That's really crucial because in case the European Commission go back to business as usual, so it just goes back to the Stability and Growth Pact and starts again to implement all the rules related to public debt and deficit rules, then the room for safeguarding adequacy, especially for some countries like Spain or Italy or some others with some problems with debts, that's become quite problematic to really change the agenda. The second point is again about the lack of ambition of the national recovery plans, about what could be in fact an opportunity nowadays to rethink what is called the silver economy. That means basically not just describing population aging as a major risk for Europe. To some extent it is, but it's also an opportunity to revise our own political economies. There is a lot of around us in the literature about the opportunities for the silver economy. For instance, for pushing for services, healthcare, long-term care, services for the elderly. This is not just a burden for the public budgets, it's also an opportunity, for instance, for increasing employment rates especially for the female part of the active population. And by contrast, I see little evidence of this potential turn and opportunity in the national recovery plans. We hope that in the implementation, some of these priorities could be revived to some extent. I hope so. At the same time, I see a lot of timidity to some extent. By contrast, I would say this is a clear opportunity for the European Union and for the European member states to largely improve the prospects for economic growth in the future, to think about, for instance, aging and the silver economy, not just as a burden, but also as an opportunity.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And now I'd like to ask Liina the final questions from here, and then we move on to the Q&A. So what is your position on the EU unemployment reinsurance scheme, and why has this really seemingly fallen off the high priority list of the Commission?
Before I reply to your question,
Yes.
I just wanted to comment what Caroline said, that the health, clearly it's a current expenditure and it's not there in the plan. Yes, clear. The current expenditure is not supposed to be covered by the RRF. But at the same time, if you take the health sector as such, or education sector, or any social care sector, you can have lots of innovation preparing for the future using the RRF. Not covering the current expenditure, not sort of plugging the hole as such, but to use the amount of money that is available to prepare for the future, for the stronger, for the better healthcare system, long care system, for the social system. That was the idea. But unemployment insurance and why it kind of disappeared. I think one of the reasons why it has fallen off the desks of no, that wouldn't be correct to say. I think that one of the reasons why it was shelved was that the pandemic hit. And it was turned into the SURE program, which was put in place, and quite correctly and quite rightly, to address the immediate need. Although there were member states who were quite hesitant to actually tap into it. But again, to support something that Caroline said earlier, and that the reluctance of member states came from the fact that these were loans. So loan, it means repayments. Can I actually afford it? So, but SURE was definitely, I think, an instrument that was absolutely needed. Nobody is questioning whether it should have been done or not. I think everybody is in full agreement that it was a really worthwhile and necessary instrument to make it available to the member states to address the crisis at that time. Now, the unemployment insurance or reinsurance scheme, because we actually, before the crisis, we started discussions already with the European Commission, what it could look like, who should be actually taking care of it, whether it's the economic side, so DG ECFIN, who should be taking care of it, should it be in the employment side, should it be the DG Employment who takes care of it. And I think this debate is still going on sort of in the background. It hasn't disappeared. It's just a matter of when it will come back. And from a trade union point of view, from our point of view, we will be definitely pushing it to come back, not to disappear. Because of course we have the SURE finishes, but then I think it's not if we should have it or will have it. It's the matter of when. Of course, we will have a lot of debates in the council. We know what were already sort of small group of countries that were dubbed at the beginning of the crisis as the frugals, and that there are going to be lots of objections from these member states. But it's a matter of how you actually, what is the composition of such reinsurance and what is the purpose going to be? I think if you look at it from an employment point of view, if the European Commission, let's say the DG Employment side, tries to start dictating to member states what their unemployment insurance scheme should be looking like, no. it's no go. It would stop there. On the other side, I think if it was proposed as a macroeconomic stabilizer mechanism, it would have more traction with the member states. So it hasn't disappeared, it will come, it's just a matter of when.
So much, thank you. So I don't know if also you have questions among yourselves.
Yeah. If I may to
respond.
It's not to respond, it's to complement what Liina said, because I followed this stuff for a long time. And what is interesting with this idea, it's not a left idea. It's was economists, very traditional economists, 92, 93, 94, Italianer, Pisani-Ferry, wrote that if you have a EMU and cannot have a budget, and at that time there were not a centralized budget, that's the best solution. So it's not necessarily a progressive proposal. It could be a progressive if we can shape the form of that, but it's a very traditional. And what is important, I think, with that is now we have two solutions for the crisis. Or we have clearly a huge budget, and we have 3-4% that have some part of stabilization, that in the future. Caroline Dodd, I have also my Dodd. I think that's the solution, but or we should have something else to stabilize. And if we miss the second opportunity to have a stabilization, or it could be by the budget or by this instrument, I think that will be a huge risk in 10 years when we will be confronted to a third crisis without having the right instrument. And now I think that what is interesting is we have two ways to go, budget or the reinsurance fund. But both would be difficult roads.
Thank you. Yes, of course, please do.
So on the unemployment reinsurance fund, one solution to it, if it's connected to EMU, is that the countries that are not part of EMU, that they join only voluntarily. So then you would have at least two of the frugal, Sweden and Denmark and Finland. Well, Finland is part of it. Denmark and Sweden anyway would not have to join. But you know, the question is, when sometimes when these things are decided at EU level, and what's decided is, you know, if it's not sufficient, then it's just causes some bureaucracy and so on. And the countries which are most in favor still are the ones which have had very high spells of unemployment during the financial crisis. So you see the same cleavages between what's called core and periphery, or north and south and so on. So those are still there anyway. And to Philippe's question, okay, so if you have a crisis in 10 years, then it's badly prepared. True, although now the heads of state and government have agreed next generation EU, and this was largely to prevent the ex post bailouts and to have this anti-expansionary instrument. So yeah, so the EU leaders can take agreements when it's necessary. Thank you.
We have quite a few questions on the European semester, and maybe it's a question for you all. So what role could the European semester play here, and what would need to change in the semester process to better support, especially the just and green transitions? I don't know if someone wants to jump in, or should we use the rounds that we had before? Philippe, you want to start with this, or?
For me, it's a difficult question, because the semester has always two sides. There is one side is the politics of the semester, so what kind of proposal there will emerge, and can we have something better balance and having more progressive semester, and I think that's one part of the question mark that we have for the future. The second one I've always is who is deciding for that, and the question of democracy. And who we trust to decide that we go there and there is very opaque at the end of the day, even for specialists. We are all here around the table. Who decide that benchmark? Who decide to do that? And where is the public debate about that? Where is the exchange? I can agree that there is a policy that I don't like if it's the result of a democratic debate, but not that is decided by we don't, not exactly. So I think that's the question has to always been a kind of tool for what kind of policies will be promoted, but what kind of democracy, who is participating. And I think it has to go much further than what we have now, a better participation with question mark of the trade unions or the NGOs. It's much more than that, because they participate of something which is decided somewhere else, and it's not really clear what is decided. So I think that we have to bring now with the question of right and left, question of democracy and how the decisions are taken and the legitimacy of all the process.
Perhaps you have something to add.
Yes, that would be nice, but I think it's unlikely that the semester will become more participatory, because Philippe, we've been talking about that for 20 years, and it's so I think that's very unlikely. You know, before that, the open method of coordination, all that, but still. So I think that that's unlikely, but clearly the corona pandemic and the next generation EU is changing the European semester, in the sense that now all of these aims related to climate will be more closely integrated with the European semester. And then there will be some kind of monitoring of how member states are spending their money. Although I talked to somebody in the European Commission the other day, they said, we don't have no idea how we're going to monitor what member states are going to be doing, because this is completely new instrument and uncharted territory. So, you know, previously it was monitoring, it was a very technocratic process, monitoring just, well, actually in two parts. One is monitoring closely the stuff related to Stability and Growth Pact, and making sure that, you know, there's no excessive deficits or excessive imbalance procedures and all of this. And then on the other side, everything else, which is, you know, the nice to have, but not necessary to have from the perspective of the EMU. So everything related to poverty targets, which are very soft, also research and innovation, education, active labor market policy, and employment rates, but these are still softer. And now all the climate stuff will surely be a more important part of it. But I think it's still in the
make. Bianca, I don't know if I may jump in.
Yes, of course you may, of course.
Well, I would start with a more, let's say, optimistic note. For the moment, the tone of our talk is a little bit pessimistic about the future of the European Union and its social dimension. I would, you know, try to be a little bit more optimistic, in the sense that European Union has always been a work in progress, and it's a strange hybrid. It's at the same time an international organization. It's a proto-federal kind of organization. But I would say, if we look at what it is now, the economic governance, including the European semester, and we compare these with what we experienced 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I would say some partial, preliminary, maybe not that effective steps towards a European government, economic government, have been done. If you consider, for instance, the fact that the European semester, especially in the future, will be very much related, not just in implementing rules, but also in checking how the EU budget is spent by the member states. That's quite a quantum leap. And it's not just a matter of governing by rules and ruling by numbers, using a famous sentence provided by Vivian Schmidt, but it's more a matter of governing European economies, looking at how the European budget is spent. That's quite an important, I would say, innovation that was in fact started well before the COVID crisis, when in fact the European Union started to link a little bit more explicitly the European semester with the cohesion policy. And I would say in that respect, we are going towards some, you know, unknown context and terrain where we are trying to approach something like a European government. We are far from a typical government, but still, I would say, with all the also democratic issues that are in the corner to some extent, well, there is some programs, and these, you know, we should be a little bit more optimistic. But then again, making things a little bit more complex. For the moment, we are talking about the design of policy decisions taken at the European level. You know, how the European semester is designed, how it approach a sort of European economic government. But a major issue, I would say, that is not to be put at the margin of our debate is the implementation of the rules and of the policy instruments that are active nowadays at European level and in the member states. A major problem, for instance, as far as the Next Generation EU, is precisely to spend the money that are there. I come from Italy, and you maybe know that Italy has an historical long-term problem in implementing cohesion policy. We basically waste money all over the last years and periods because we are not able to spend money because of institutional incapacity, because of problems in our public administration. That's a big challenge, because I would think, and if you go to Madrid or to Lisbon and some other countries in especially Southern Europe, you see there, all the policymakers and practitioners are really, really worried about the lack of institutional capacities to spend the money that we have in our pockets and will have in our pockets in the next years. This is a major problem because I imagine that the so-called frugal countries in few years, in case Italy or Spain or Greece will not be able to spend money, to effectively spend money, will go back saying, we want this money back. And this could be a major problem for the future of European integration.
I think Liina has something.
I was reflecting when what Philippe was saying, what Caroline was saying, that what kind of how we in the ETUC, how we see the semester process. Obviously, when the semester started, it was pure economics. There was nothing sort of social, but we created our own little team in the ETUC. We created a network of our members, among our members, of national officers who followed the semester process. And we have regular meetings. So we have been chipping away sort of little by little, working with the European Commission, insisting that the semester cannot be just about economy and following fiscal rules, that the semester must be more. And if you compare what it was 10 years ago and what it is today, there is actually a big change. There is considerably more social in it. Okay, that's another matter, what the member states do with the country-specific recommendations, and we know that they are not very keen on implementing these country-specific recommendations, but at least they are there, which gives also our members some tools or the sort of hook to use to insist with the governments that, look, you have to do it. When I was still back in Estonia, I was also following the semester from the national side. And in so many times when we were arguing with our government and they would not listen to us, but then the European Commission or the OECD or even the World Bank come with the same or very similar argument. We say, look, guys, are you going to take this seriously finally? Okay, fine, you don't want to listen to us, the trade unions, but are you going to take it seriously now? Are you going to address the problem? So in this sense, it's the sort of one side of it, giving us also tools or possibilities to at European level and also at national level. Of course, the other matter is sort of how much we actually get access. I can't complain about us having access at European level as the ETUC. Because I think the Commission, both the DG Employment, which doesn't have big role in the semester, and they actually are sometimes looking for our sort of help to argue with the DG ECFIN that there should be more role. But even with DG ECFIN, which is not the easiest one from a trade union point of view to work with, they have recognized that what we put forward is not some ideology-driven arguments, but that there are actually reasons and reasoning and research and serious thinking that has gone into the arguments that we put forward. So in this sense, we see improvement. And of course, now the semester is the instrument that the national recovery plans come under the sort of supervision of the semester. So we are also trying to encourage our members. We know that there is a serious problem of capacity, not only in public administration, how to spend the money, but also from our side of being able to contribute and to monitor and to follow. So we also have to find ways how to increase this capacity. And one thing is the administrative capacity to spend the money that is available, but the other that nobody's not talking about yet is, do we actually have enough workforce, the skills to spend the money?
Thanks, Liina. Thank you. There's another question in the Q&A, unless anyone else has something to add. So do you think the social turn could have even been politically considered if the UK would have still been a member of the EU? I don't know if Philippe, you want to start?
That's a difficult question for a friend from UK if you say yes. But I will say, yeah, the decision of UK to leave changed a lot. And then that's what we are listening now is kind of to find the new coalition against more integration. But with UK was kind of easiest because first they had a great diplomacy, they control a lot part of the game, there were a lot of information. Then the people were behind and small countries, that was easy, they don't have to show up. But I think what is more important than the UK is always see the kind of, let's say, next phase of the green capital. And it seems to me that Germany is key because we go, that's my vision, more and more to regional. In a regional economy, then Germany is not the export up because the electric car will be constructed in China. They don't have to export. China has the capacity. So Germany will have kind of a key role if you return to and I'm right that we will have more regional economy with boundaries with the other region, a key role in the European integration, not having this kind of mixed role between a leader of the integration and also the export and the global role. So I think for me, really, what will be interesting is not only as I said, the election in Germany, but what kind of alliance we will have between the different parties, because part of the game is very open, and what kind of project Germany will just see for the future. And I think with UK and perhaps a different role than the last 10 years of Germany, the game will be much more open and much more interesting in the future.
Yes, please say.
So coming from one of these, living in a country which is a grumpy attitude to EU social policy, I can witness the kind of debates going on. So I mean, you know, Denmark say, oh, now the UK is gone and we can't hide behind them anymore, and so on. So this was, of course, the origin of the Frugals, from which the Netherlands took the leadership. But in the social policy area, the trade unions in the Nordic countries are very skeptical towards more EU social policy because they fear that it undermines their authority in the collective bargaining, because part of what the EU is regulating on and legislating on falls under the authority of the trade unions, which are autonomous. So this position is very persistent over time. It's kind of a dogma, so it's rather dogmatic. And yet what we could see is that now it's been possible to agree on a whole lot of social legislation, despite these, this grumpy position of these small countries. So this includes and through the Pillar of Social Rights, the Parental Leave Directive, and also now the Directive on minimum income. So there is some stuff going on, and this is it would have been more difficult politically if the UK had been there, I guess.
Yeah, just a little correction. It's a directive on minimum wage.
Yes, it's directive on minimum wage. Yes.
Minimum income is
different.
Social
yes, it's social assistance. Yes.
Yeah. So if UK were, I mean, yeah, in certain areas, it has definitely made it easier to take decisions. I remember the day when or the sort of few days after the referendum, and the UK was had made a decision, and then the time went on, and they sort of withdraw more and more from the sort of active role in the council formation, especially in the council. And I was talking to a trade lawyer, and he told me that the fact that the UK is withdrawing makes it much easier to make decisions in the trade area, international trade area. But when it comes to social policy, because what has happened, and has happened very fast at European level, has been provoked by the crisis, by the pandemic. So my guess is that even if the UK were still a member state, we would still have the RRF. We would still have the reference in the regulation to the pillar principles, because they need the money as much as any of the current member states need it. So because we see their public debt is going through the roof. They are really struggling. And they had to put in place exactly the same kind of schemes like the Shore assisted in the European Union. So they're actually in the same boat in terms of what the country needs.
David, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that Liina is absolutely right in stressing the, the mixed kind of interplay between the UK and the other member states. And she's, absolutely right when she stresses that basically, if you look what the UK government has done in the last couple of years, they basically did the same. And among other instruments that they activated was precisely short-time working schemes. That was quite a novelty, let's say, for the UK political economy. At the same time, as far as the political equilibrium in the European Union and between the member states, I would think that in the long term, being at 27 instead of 28 will make a difference, in the sense that Philippe already talked about the EU enlargement as part of the changing picture between the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. And to some extent, the first Barroso Commission, the second Barroso Commission were very much in line with this change towards the center-right part of the spectrum. And in that respect, UK had a pivotal role in managing or using the enlargement to push for some right-wing kind of ideas. And I imagine that in the future, being at 27, will represent an opportunity for especially continental European countries and also a responsibility, especially for the German government, to be even more the leading country of the European Union. And in that respect, the next general elections in Germany could represent a turning point.
So we actually are really on time, it never happens. And just a reminder, we have a September that is full of upcoming events, also related to the one that we had today, especially on the European semester in a few weeks. So if you want to check that out, we would obviously highly appreciate that. And a big thank you to all of our speakers, both in-house. We're starting to reorganize in-house meetings, and also to David and Natali from joining us from Italy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. So we're recording on the YouTube channel.
That's the.
Okay.